It is very important that as a woman, you keep good company with good women. Well, hey, and welcome back to The Commonplace. My name is Autumn, and I'm here with another video for the Mother Culture series, and I'm going to be talking about 3 ideal types for women, or 3 feminine ideal types. So the ideal type, if you are not familiar with that phrase, is something from the classical tradition, the classical world. Now, we know post-Christ that Christ is the ideal type, but before that, generally, it was understood as aiming towards excellence. How did different characters embody in story, if you think about like Homer's epics, which we're gonna talk about one today, but how did embodiment in story show things like heroism or courage, faithfulness, fortitude, justice, things like this. And you were aiming in the direction of those virtues and ideals. And whenever you could find them in a form, that could build out part of the ideal type. And so of course now we know that Christ is the ideal type. He is the fullness, the perfect example, the perfect person. And so we aim to be like him. In him we see what we were intended to be as persons. And that's kind of why you get into the idea in the classical world of, you'll hear this phrase that classical education makes you more human, and people can kind of bristle at that. I use language like humanizing a lot, whether it be my Dumb Phone series or when I talk about the philosophy and practicals of my work, how I do what I do. I'm always trying to live in a humanizing way, and that's because we are humans, we are persons, and we were intended by God to be a certain thing. And so in classical ed, when we talk about the ideal type and becoming more human, I'm going off topic a little bit already. We are not saying that those who have been classically educated are more valuable, have more dignity, have greater worth as persons. No, of course, that's not what we're saying. All people are made in the image of God. They inherently have dignity, value, and worth. But we do know that the things we repeatedly think, love, and do shape us. And that shaping exists on a spectrum. And are we becoming more like the ideal type who is Christ himself? Are we becoming more like him and the image he's given us as people, as man should be? Or are we getting farther away from that? And we know that exists, right? Like everyone's pretty comfortable saying, yeah, I can think of an example of someone who's given themselves over to their basest, most disgusting traits and desires, and it makes them less human. They don't seem human anymore. And then of course, the other side exists as well. And so that's kind of a bit about the ideal type and the humanizing language that classical educators will use so that you're not kind of lost in the water here. And I want to also say, as we get started here, that the ideal type, it can be a man and women can learn from that. It can be a woman and man can learn from that. So with classical education, a lot of times we're looking at what is common amongst people. Mason talks about this a lot as well. Of course, everyone's individual. Everyone has their own quirks, their personalities, their gifts, their temptations, their passions, their sins. We're all different and we engage with God differently, and we are our own people, but we are also people. And so we focus on what is common between us. What are the common questions of humanity, of the soul, of the mind, of the body, of how we move in God's world, how we pursue the flourishing life. That is what we're focused on, which is why we can read things that don't look exactly like us or sound exactly like our lives or even our own gender, because yes, men and women are different, but we can still learn because we're persons. And so that is the ideal type. You can learn from men. I just want to go ahead and say all that in case you are new to classical world and think that my making this video of 3 feminine ideal types that I love and learn from and think of often means that you should be hunting out only women characters for your daughters is not true. I just wanted to make one that would give life-giving, reflective images in the mind of a mother teacher as she enters the school year, because we're about to start here, that giving these very specific feminine examples where the virtues are embodied in a feminine way, which is going to be different, yes, than the masculine way, that it would just be a fun video as we start the school year. It would be a gift for women to think about these 3, well, kind of 4, these 4 women from classic literature. And so that's what we're gonna do today. There's the whole beginning spiel, all the little disclaimers and caveats I needed to add in, and a little bit of context before we get started. So when I think about ideal types, of course, the ones I have focused on have changed throughout my literary life and throughout my seasons of motherhood, and now as I've entered into formal schooling in our home, things like that have changed as well. But these are the ones that I'm thinking about the most right now. And one that kind of reaches back to previous times as well is Penelope from the Odyssey. So if you have not read Homer's The Odyssey, you're gonna have to at some point on this classical adventure you are on, because it's a masterpiece. There's a reason why this has been read for thousands of years. I mean, that's some real buying power right there. When you think about giving over your time, your attention, your loves, is a book that has mattered to people, whether they were rich, poor, male, female, Christian, pagan, that people have continued to read this and pass this on says something. And I have a different video about why classical education centers around old books. And whenever I talk about this now, I recommend that you read Joshua Gibbs' Love What Lasts, because it's a tremendous book about this idea of cultural artifacts and the lasting power and what that means. But anyways, back to the Odyssey. So the Odyssey is ultimately a story about coming home. We follow Odysseus through many trials and difficulties on his attempt to get back to his home country of Ithaca. But I want to focus on Penelope, his wife, who has been left back at home. Odysseus left to fight a war. He's been gone 20-ish years, and no one knows what's really happened to him, the people back at home on Ithaca. And so Penelope is there, and she is pursued by a gaggle of suitors who are in her home, eating her food, taking over her husband's possessions, in some ways making life difficult for her son, Telemachus. And Penelope is a shining example of feminine virtue. She is clever. She is faithful. She's a protector of her home, of the things within it, and not just for her own personal safety and her son's safety, but for her larger household, for her country, for her land. She protects these things. She's thinking much larger than just herself. She has been held up historically as a picture of chastity, of fortitude, of fidelity. She's a problem solver. She's perseverant. She's persistent. She is a wise, wonderful woman. Now, there are a couple things that are unique to Penelope that you are probably not experiencing in your life right now. I'm sure your home is not being overrun with suitors who are demanding to take your hand in marriage because your husband is missing on the island of a goddess. But there are also plenty of things that you can relate to with Penelope, and you can understand how virtue is seeping out into her life and protecting the things that she loves most, because ultimately she is a hospitable welcomer. Wendell Berry has this phrase about marriage where he talks about how both people need to learn to be a welcomer and a guest. And when I think about women, when I think about mother teachers in the home, we are ultimately the welcomers in the home. We are the ones who are to be hospitable, yes, to people outside of our homes, but like very much so to the people in our homes and our everyday interactions. We are to build and protect homes that allow life to flourish, and that happens only when we are welcomers. And Penelope has done that. She has created life in her home, and this is what her husband is longing to return to. The picture of Ithaca's shores, the place itself, matter, yes, but he wants to be home, and the home has been created by her. It's also been maintained and protected by her this entire time. And so she does two really wily, wonderful things in the story. The first is that she starts working on a burial shroud, and it should take a couple months. It's taken her 3 years. This woman works all day on this project and then undoes it every night. She weaves and she unweaves, and the suitors have agreed to, when you finish this, you'll then pick a new husband. And she is just so crafty. She meticulously works and unworks in order to preserve time. And time is something that is required to grow in wisdom, to fully think about something. We live in a time and place where we very quickly and easily get sound bites of information. We turn around and parrot opinions that we've gotten from someone on Instagram or from the news that we like, and we think we know something. And this is a big danger for Charlotte Mason. She actually very much talks about in Ourselves forming political opinions and how long it should take, and that you should have deep knowledge of history and politics and philosophy before you start sharing your opinions about things. And I think that's really helpful. And Penelope shows this contrast with the suitors who think they know what's going on, and they make demands on her. They tie her to a clock. They put her on a schedule, and they say, this must happen, this must happen. And yet Penelope knows in order to weigh out certain decisions, to understand certain things, to make wise decisions, she's going to need time. And so she creates time for herself by doing this burial shroud project. She's just very wise, and she's very much a problem solver who maintains the course of trying to do what is wise. And she's almost contrasted to her husband, Odysseus, who is very clever, and you like him. He has a lot of tricks and antics, but he often ends up in trouble because he's not the best thinker sometimes. And so she's almost the embodiment of what it should be in a wise, feminine way. And I love that about her. Then when the suitors catch on that she's been tricking them, because they do find out, she sets about a competition that only her husband could win. And she knows this, but she challenges them all to do it and says, yeah, whoever can do this can be my husband. But she already knows it's going to be her husband. She doesn't know he's going to be coming back, which he does. Oh, have I just ruined it for you? There's no way you didn't know that yet. Like, the Odyssey is shaped too much of cultural imagery and language. You had to have already known that. If not, I'm really sorry. He comes back. Anyways, she sets it up so only her husband can be her husband. Again, she's being faithful. She is being true. She's being perseverant and diligent in her work to stay true and faithful as his wife. And she doesn't even know if he's alive. So you have this whole picture of Penelope, who I just love. as a protector of the home, as the keeper of the home. Now, if you are thinking, I don't have these suitors and I don't have to come up with competitions, here are some things that might help you connect with Penelope a little bit more if you haven't read it, because again, it's a masterpiece and you should. Penelope raises her son and manages her home without her husband. Her husband is gone. If you are a military family, if you are someone whose husband works a lot, if you are someone who, maintains all of what would be considered like the home tasks and the child rearing and the child teaching in home education, you have a lot going on. And this is a picture of a woman who does this well and skillfully and faithfully for 20 years on her own. She has immense fortitude and perseverance. She has a picture of where she's trying to go and she works towards it faithfully. And Telemachus, we know his father is proud of him when they meet. He thinks he is a good man. So she can be proud about the work that she has done, the things she has instilled in her son, the way she has cultivated what's in her home and has been given to her to be managed. And that's something that all women should long to do, right? To do our work faithfully. And in the end, to be able to be proud of what's been done, that we've been able to pursue the good life as God has laid it out to be. She also uses her mind, but with humility. She understands there are limitations. Again, with the buying the time or creating these competitions, she understands that she needs more time. She needs more margin, more space in order to do these things well, to consider how to move forward. She moves slowly and intentionally, something that in our modern age we could all learn to do. Back to my point about how we now just can get a soundbite or a quick idea and think we know something. She understands that's not how you work. That's not how a person makes and moves wisely in the world. And that's something that I think mother teachers could really benefit from. And then again, ultimately, she is the welcomer. She is hospitable. She has protected her home. And that is what we are trying to do, particularly if you are a mother teacher, like you've brought your children's education into your home. You are trying to form and aim in a direction that is probably very countercultural. It is not the first time that classical education would be, running against the current, if you will, but it is very obvious how that's happening nowadays. And so you're fighting a good fight. And Penelope is one who is willing to do that. And so I think she can be a great image to reflect in your inner thought life, in your mind. Let it shape the contours of your mind is usually how I talk about it, because what you behold is what you become. And I think Penelope is definitely an ideal type worth your consideration. Okay, so the next one is Marmi from Little Women. Now, I, like a lot of people, read Little Women in, I don't even remember when I first read it, maybe middle school, maybe high school, I can't remember. And definitely was like, I'm Joe March. I don't think I've ever met anyone who doesn't think they're a Joe or a Meg. If you thought you were a Beth or an Amy, let me know below. I think everyone I know wanted to be Joe March. And Joe's wonderful in her own right, obviously. But when I reread it as an adult, I remember thinking, oh, Joe, we have a lot of the same vices. I don't know if you're as shining as you were to me in high school, but Marmi caught my attention in a new way. And of course, this is because I had become a mother, right? So I was in a different season of life, having different needs and responsibilities. And so the character of Marmi really caught my attention. So everyone probably who's watching this has read Little Women or at least seen one of the movie adaptations. You should definitely read it though. And keep an eye towards Marmi. Now, there is the obvious, like Marmi is very sweet and kind and nurturing. The home is very convivial. Her girls are able to really live these flourishing lives that I think many of us would love to have our kids living, right? Like we want them to be doing the things that the March sisters were doing, engaged in many of the practices that they had, the celebrations, the festivities, the humbling, the service of others, those sorts of things, right? They'd be really wonderful. And Marmi seems to be like the moral compass of the house. But what I want to pull out specifically for Marmi, because I'm trying to do a different thing for each book and each woman, is that she has a very strong core of ideals and a picture of the good life. And so Marmi faces a lot of difficulty. She is, she's single parenting, kind of like Penelope was as well, but they also don't have a lot, and yet what they have, they give freely and generously. She is always looking to love neighbor more than self, and she is trying to bring her children into it. And we see the girls continue to grow in their ability to sacrifice for the sake of others throughout the story. Each girl doing it in her own way, each girl struggling to do it in her own way. But we see Marmi kind of setting the course by leading in what she is doing. And I think that's a tremendous thing to take to heart as a mother. First, if you are someone who, like me, is with your children all the time because you have them at home for schooling as well. And when I say they're with you all the time, that is historically normal. Now it's not a normal thing to be with your children all the time, but historically you were with your children all working together, pursuing the same things. Your little cottage industry of a house was very productive, things like that. So I don't think this is some huge hardship that homeschool mothers have, and I don't want you to think that I do, because I don't. But I do want you to notice that Marmi's strength comes from her maternal love. So she loves these girls and she wants to impart to them what she thinks is the good life. And that is very much the classical language that I use when I talk about what we're doing, when we ourselves are the curriculum, when we are modeling, when we are showing, rather than just telling our kids what is good, what is true, what is beautiful. Marmi lays out a life in which the girls have a place to participate in it with her because she actually loves the things she says are worth loving. And so when you think about coming to the classical world and you're maybe a little overwhelmed when you realize classical education is not just cute tea parties and frolicking about in linen dresses in Instagram squares, but is actually learning to rightly love that which is worth loving, that you must be reordered, that you must change, it can be really overwhelming. But what you need to come back to as the mother teacher, as the feminine influence in your home, is that you must learn to love these things too. So you must do them. It does feel like there's an upending of your life. All of a sudden, the way you spend your time, the thoughts you think, the words you say, and the practices you engage in start to shift. But it's a really good thing. And when I look at Marmi, I see that she's able to build a life around the things she loves, and her girls are brought into it in a very Charlotte Mason way, atmosphere, discipline, life. This is what she loves. It comes out of her fingertips in her home. These are the habits she instills in her daughters because they are the things that she repeatedly does. And these are the ideas that come in through the books they read. They're a very political family. I'm not saying that's necessarily the way you need to go about doing it, but in this time, that is what they were involved in. They were very much part of the progressive movement for their time in this book. But I really feel like I just opened up a whole can of worms there, but I'm going to keep going with just the book. What I'm saying is that the ideas you bring into your home shape the affections and the thoughts and the actions of the people in them, and Marmi does a great job of bringing in the things that she knows will create a flourishing life. And the last thing that I think can be really influential and helpful for moms is that Marmi talks about struggling with anger when she's talking to Jo. So Jo has, nearly let Amy die after being mad at her because Amy burns her book. And she's just talking about how angry she is, and she doesn't know what to do with it. And Jo's surprise at Marmi's admission to being angry and struggling with anger, I think shows the amount of self-control that Marmi has learned to use in her home, to command herself towards. And this is something I've spent some time thinking about. I've read some old journal entries from girls, in the 1800s, about 16 years old, and they're writing things like, I have a duty to learn to be self-controlled, or I must command myself towards right behavior and right action. And then you compare them to random samples of journals from 16-year-olds from today in the last 20 years, and it's like, so-and-so left so-and-so at school, but I want it, and I don't know why my parents won't let me stay out late. And of course, this is a very broad brush generalization of children and teens. I understand this, but I do think you can acknowledge that there is a different expectation of let out whatever's inside your heart as you're feeling because it must be true and expressed versus is what I'm feeling right? And if not, I need to control it and command it towards what is right. These are two very different ideas. We don't have the latter today. We just don't. And Marmi shows that she has learned to do that. She has learned to command herself towards what is good, even if it is not what she is feeling in the moment. And how many of us as moms have to learn to be impervious? Misty Winkler talks about in one of the Scully Sisters episodes, like being this, or maybe it was Brandy, is a conversation they had of being this very firm door that when your children maybe are highly emotional and they're throwing their big emotions at you and it's a very difficult day, it's like they're throwing them against a massive locked door that just does not budge. Because you are the adult and you are responsible for training these children towards just sentiments. Your emotions must correspond with reality as it actually is. And so anger is one that ultimately is rooted in other things, right? Like fear. If you look at an emotions wheel, you'll realize that anger is the masking word we use for a lot of other things. But when that happens, you have to be able to be the one who is composed and who is steadfast and who's able to model what it looks like to not be overrun by your emotions and to handle them in a healthy way and to respond to others in a loving way despite what is going on internally. Marmi has learned to do that over the arc of their childhoods, and we don't get to see that in the book, but she mentions that their father, had to help her with that in the early years. And I think a lot of moms will be encouraged by that notion of you're continuing to grow, particularly with this topic of anger, that you can become the calming influence in your home that sets the thermostat rather than taking the temperature with a thermometer. You are actually setting the tone and the pace and the feel of your home. So, long live Marmi. And then lastly, I pulled Little House on the Prairie and Farmer Boy because I wanted to talk about both moms, Miss, Ma Wilder and Ma Ingalls, but they're kind of going to be grouped together as a feminine ideal type. So both of these women are incredibly hard workers, right? And they cultivate goodness in the people around them, but also in the place around them, right? They farm, they bring life from the land, they produce fruit with the things they're given. They take care to, they're not actually the farmers, I guess, but they are part of the farming family. They help grow and harvest and plant and water, and that's not the order you do those things in, but all of those things are part of their daily life, and they're doing it in land form and also people form. And one line that I love to use from Ma Wilder, Almanzo Wilder's mother, is "I must fly." She is in the middle of eating dinner, and this woman just does not stop moving. And she gets up from the food and says, "I must fly," and takes off to the kitchen because she has a bunch of things to do, whether that's making soap or dyeing colors for their wool that's coming back, or baking, cooking, all these sorts of things. And I love that picture. Now, I know that there could be some hopefully charitable pushback on what I'm about to say because we do live in the age of high emphasis on self-care. So I will just say right now that nothing I'm about to say means that you shouldn't be caring for yourself as an embodied being. You have a body, you have a mind, you have a spirit. All three must be cared for, but that happens, I think, in the regular patterns of a humanizing life. If you stop and eat meals with your children all day, you sit down and eat them, if you engage in the life of the church, if you get out of doors, if you read good books a little bit every day, these are actually the ways you care for yourself. It doesn't have to be, I must have 4 hours away every Saturday to go do this thing. It might be great if you get time away every Saturday to go read a book, that's awesome, but I'm very wary of the demands of modern self-care where I must have these unique moments where I'm all alone and get exactly what I want in order to be cared for. It doesn't really work with life, and we do live in life. And so I want to say that yes, you should be sleeping. You should be sleeping 8, 9 hours a night, all sorts of things like that. But you also need to have a paradigm shift as a mother teacher that you are going to be working from the time you wake up to the time you go to bed, and possibly throughout the night too, because moms do not clock out at bedtime. I remember realizing in the early years with my kids that I did not have quitting time at 5 o'clock or even 6:30 when they went to bed. I had second shift at night. I had things I had to do for our home, for our family, things in the middle of the night, like taking care of the babies who were waking up, all sorts of things. But that was a huge mental shift that had to happen for me in order to not be frustrated that it was happening. But no, this is now the job. This is the work. I am a mother. And so my responsibilities and my duties look this way. And again, I'm not saying you never sleep, you never sit down and have a glass of water or a cup of tea with your children. I am just saying that you need to have this paradigm shift sometimes of when I wake up until I go to sleep. Like these women, I will be doing good, productive in the ultimate sense, not in the check off to do task oriented sense. I will be doing that kind of work all day. And then when you do it all day, you're not surprised by it. You're actually quite pleased with your efforts and your labors, ultimately to Christ, but out of love for your family. And I think these women give beautiful pictures of that. They are joyful, they have faith in God, they do their duties well, they are dependable, their husbands can depend on them, their children find them to be a comfort, a friend, they find them to be wise, their communities depend on them, the things they do earn the respect of others, people are proud to know them, to see them, to meet with them on the street. They do not tear others down. They are actually quite quiet, working with their hands at home, unconcerned with things that are unimportant. And I love the picture of these women. I love the idea of getting up and seeing your duty before you, of giving it what you have. Not always every day is it gonna go swimmingly, but realizing that training and cultivating and creating goodness in every area of your life is actually the work of the day. And isn't that a unique gift for women to have? And what will that do in forming us if we do that for, however many years? So those are a couple of ideal types in classic literature that I think would be worth your time this fall as you start the school year and maybe you're looking for an inspiring idea to have in your own mind and heart. And I'll see you guys soon.